Number 1. The Basement. This story took place on Friday the 13th. Okay, that's not exactly true, but Killer Orange Cat wanted me to say that, so it would conform with the video. But let's just pretend. This is a story that might be a little hard to believe, but I swear to you that it did happen. My daughter had an imaginary friend when she was really little. She was our firstborn child, and didn't have friends that she could play with. So it made sense that she would have an imaginary friend to do things with. She had a kitchen set and a tea set, and she always played with these with her imaginary friend. Now, I know there are a lot of paranormal stories about children who have had imaginary friends. However, I'm not going in the direction that many of them have gone before. First off, the imaginary friend did not have a name. My daughter didn't treat the imaginary friend like it was a real person. All she did was pretend that there was another girl who was her age that she had tea parties with. My daughter was not involved in mischief either. However, whenever she may have broken something or done something wrong, she never blamed it on an imaginary friend. The only time that something was really weird was one day when my daughter seemed a little distraught by something. She said she wanted to have a tea party, but she didn't have anyone to have it with. She asked me to do it, and I decided to go ahead and do it. My thought was that maybe she had outgrown the imaginary friend. Or maybe she was tired of playing with it. I don't know, but I did the tea party with her. Later that day, the light bulb in our kitchen went out, so I needed to go to the basement and get the bulb. I went and I opened up the basement door, and upon looking down the stairs, I was shocked to see a little girl, about my daughter's age, standing at the bottom of the stairs in the basement. She was only there for a brief moment, and then she was gone, so I blinked and convinced myself that I was just seeing things. Later in the evening, when I was making dinner, I heard my daughter talking to someone in her room. Upon going up and entering her room, I saw her sitting at the tea party table, talking to the imaginary friend, like she always had before. My mind made up this weird story that the imaginary friend was the ghost of a little girl, and maybe she didn't show up for the earlier tea party because she was trapped in the basement that day, and perhaps my actions let her out. I don't know. It seems unlikely, but I do consider the situation to have been still a little scary. Number 2. Bad evening. I remember being in the 6th grade. My parents have recently gotten divorced, and I got picked on because I was a skinny kid who wore glasses. My dad rarely took us clothes shopping, so my clothing looked pretty awful a lot of the time. So that grade was hard for me. It may surprise a lot of people that I failed that year. The teachers were mean, and they demanded that I take the Stanford-Binet IQ test. They wanted to prove my IQ was lower than average, so they could put me in an LD class. I have to admit to this day, I can see the look on those two asshole teachers' faces when I scored 146. Their request was denied. I was then put into a class with a different teacher. But before this happened, I was bullied by the teachers. One teacher called me an annoying child in front of an entire assembly, and she called me a liar, Mrs. Barbara Bong, and I don't mind sharing her name, and the other teacher, Mr. McKenna. One time I missed a homework assignment and he pulled me out of band class. In front of the entire class, he humiliated me by yelling, "You don't think you need to do your homework because you're going to be a famous toot-toot player?" I played the trumpet. My problem was depression. I hated my father, but he got custody of us and used us as props to make my mom feel bad. He drank himself into a stupor all the time. You see, the reason I did not get that homework assignment done was because of my drunken father. While I was working at the table, he started yelling and screaming at us. He demanded that me, my 6-year-old sister, and my 13-year-old brother come into his bedroom. When he was drunk off his ass and standing there, which was really, really awful. His new wife was laying on the bed. Worst of all, he had a revolver in his hand. My dad began yelling and screaming at us, telling us that he was in charge of the house, and we had to do what he told us. He kept swinging that loaded gun around while he yelled at us. At 13, my brother was bigger than my dad, and he never feared my father. And my dad noticed that he was not scared, and kept challenging him to a fight. But he also kept swinging the gun around while he did it. He was so far gone by that point that I knew he would shoot my brother if he tried anything. While he was yelling, he swung the gun in the direction of my stepmom, accidentally pulling the trigger. The bullet missed her by an inch, and that is when she began screaming at him and made us leave the room. I was traumatized by it, and I couldn't finish my work. I was so scared. So the next day, Friday the 13th, I missed a homework assignment and got humiliated in front of a class of 30 students. They laughed at me, and the teacher did not make them stop. One of the kids got out of his desk and pushed me. The teacher didn't stop him, and that was when I became Carrie fucking White. The moment that kid turned his back, I grabbed a pencil, and I jumped on his back and stabbed him 20 times with the pencil. When I was done, I looked at Mr. McKenna, and there was fear in his eyes, because he had just pushed a student to have a psychotic episode. And I didn't get in trouble for this because if he had revealed the situation, I would have revealed the abuse that pushed me over the edge. He would have probably lost his job. But I will tell you one thing. That motherfucker never humiliated me again. Number 3. I nearly lost my best friend to murder. This story is not about me, but about my best friend, who I will call F. A little bit of background. F and I have been friends since we were in elementary school together. Throughout elementary school and the beginning of middle school, we were pretty much inseparable. We would borrow books from the library and read to one another, or F would come to my house and play video games or watch cartoons with me. Other kids did not want to be around us, because we were poor and deemed ugly by our classmates. So we were pretty much each other's lone friend. Everything changed when F turned 11. She was put in gifted classes, which meant that we were on 2 separate floors of the school. As a gifted student, F's workload became more demanding, and her teachers expected her to be a flawless genius at all times. On top of this, F was still being bullied, and her parents recently divorced, and something snapped inside her. F began to push me and her parents away, preferring to stay in her dark room all by herself, doing nothing more than staring at the ceiling. She began to eat less, and she had a hard time keeping down what little she did eat. Even worse, other students told me that they had seen F in some of their classes, staring out at nothing, as if she was in a trance. Well, one day, I finally caught up to F on the playground. She was sitting on top of the monkey bars, staring out at nothing. I said hi to her, but she did not respond. As I got closer to her, I noticed that her lips were moving, and I thought she was singing a song. I got closer to try and hear what she was singing, but as I did, I realized that she was quietly having an argument with herself, going back and forth about whether or not she should do something, but I never caught what that something was. 2 nights later, F locked herself in her bathroom and slit her wrists. Luckily, her father managed to break down the door and reach F before she could bleed to death. After she received medical help, F was transferred to a mental health facility for kids and teens. Though she was only 11 years old, she was told that she would be staying on the same level as the teens, because 1, she was more mature and well-spoken than most kids her age, and 2, she was told that the majority of the kids on the children's ward were more likely to hurt others than hurt themselves. F was scared that no one would want to be around her, Since most of the patients on the teen floor were between 15 and 17 years of age, though very few of the teen guys spoke to her, the teenage girls on the ward immediately embraced F. 3 girls stayed with F as she had her blood drawn, and after that they showed her around the facility. The older girls were genuinely happy to have F around, and invited her to join them in pretty much any activity they were doing. They liked to style each other's hair as much as they could, without access to hairspray, which could be huffed. They also colored each other's nails with markers and highlighters, since nail polish was forbidden. But mostly the girls would talk to F about their lives, and F would listen without judgment. For the first time in her life, F was popular. Things were going great for the first couple of weeks in the facility. Then 2 major things happened at once. First, F was put on what was considered in the early 90s to be the wonder drug for people suffering from depressions, Prozac. Initially, the drug made F tired and made it hard for her to concentrate on the most basic tasks. She said that during her second week at the hospital, her mom had apparently came to visit her, but she had no recollection of the event at all. Her mother said that when she saw F that night, F was so tired she could barely hold her head up. The nurses assured her mother that F would eventually get used to the drug and get back to normal, but that was far from the case. Second was F's introduction to her new roommate. Every new patient spent his or her first 2 weeks on suicide watch before they were given a room. Of all the teenage girls on the floor that F could have roomed with, she was paired up with the one girl that for some unknown reason had decided she had hated F the moment she had laid eyes on her. Kristen was 15. She was tall, highly intelligent, prim and proper. She always wore long-sleeve blouses because she'd been cutting her arms and she was 10, and she was anorexic. F tried to make friends with Kristen. She tried to engage Kristen in conversation, but Kristen would just stare at F and say nothing. On the first night in her new room, F unknowingly made the mistake of sleeping on her side, facing towards her roommate. Kristen jumped out of her bed and started yelling at F for staring at her, despite the fact that F had been asleep. From that night on, F was expected to sleep facing the wall. A few nights later, F had been throwing up all day, so while the rest of the teens were in the common room talking, watching TV or playing pool, F sat on her bed and read a book. When Kristen walked in and saw F reading, she stormed over to F's bed, snatched the book out of F's hands. Then she began yelling at F for reading a Nancy Drew book. She started shaking F by the shoulders, berating her for reading a baby's book, which caused F to throw up on her bed. F raced past Kristen to the bathroom and threw up again. She said that her heart was racing, and she was afraid to get up from the floor because she thought she might pass out. Kristen followed F into the bathroom and started yelling at F for making a mess. F rested her head against the cool rim of the toilet and watched Kristen yell at her. Kristen's body seemed to have an aura around it, and the aura swayed as Kristen frantically waved her arms up and down in frustration, causing F to throw up again. Eventually, a nurse came into the room to see what Kristen was doing, to see what Kristen was fussing about. The nurse glanced at F from the doorway and immediately yelled at Kristen to get out of the room. F was carried by one of the counselors to the infirmary. It was determined that the Prozac she had been given was poisoning her body. She spent the next 3 weeks getting medical treatment. Once she returned to her floor, F was flooded with hugs by teary-eyed girls who missed her. Through the crowd of girls surrounding her in a hug group, F could see Kristen glaring at her. F had hoped that the staff would give her another roommate, but she was not that lucky. Although her new medication made her a little tired, she was feeling a lot better physically than she had in a long time. When F returned to her room again, though, she found out that Kristen seemed to hate her even more than before. Kristen snapped at F for everything, including barely looking Kristen's way, or for slightly slouching as she read, or for breathing heavy when her asthma was flaring up. F spent as little time as she could in her room, and she dreaded every moment she was in the presence of Kristen. One night, everything came to a boiling point. F had gone to bed early that night because she was feeling under the weather. She was beginning to sleep pretty soundly because she did not see or hear anyone come into the room. All of a sudden, she felt something over her face. F snapped awake, and she realized that she was staring up at her pillow. She felt a knee between her chest, and a heavy weight bearing into her face. F began to struggle against the person on top of her, but she could barely move under the weight of her assailant. She tried to wiggle her way out from under the assailant when she finally heard her roommate's voice above her yelling down at her, "Why don't you just die? Just die." Suddenly, F heard screaming to her left, "Nurse! Somebody get the nurse, hurry!" F's fight or flight skills finally kicked in. She mustered what little energy she had to push against Kristen's chest, causing her roommate to fall back onto her bed. F swatted the pillow off of her face and fell onto the floor, hitting her head on the bed table in the process. All she could do was gasp for air as the nurses finally rushed in, grabbing Kristen by the arms and pulled her out of the room. F did not see Kristen for the next 2 days. A nurse came to clean out Kristen's side of the room. F breathed a sigh of relief, thinking that Kristen may have been transferred to the wing above the floor that she was on, which apparently housed the hospital's most violent residents. Then the next day, F was sitting in a group therapy when suddenly Kristen was brought in to join the group. She sat down in the chair next to the person to the left of F. The nurse who had accompanied Kristen told the group that Kristen had an exciting announcement to make. Kristen was going home. At first, F sat in stunned disbelief as Kristen talked disingenuously about how much she was going to miss everyone and how much she had learned from the group, despite the fact that Kristen made no effort to make friends while at the facility. The nurse then asked Kristen if she would like to tell each group member something that she was going to miss about them. Kristen went around the group, trying to find one nice thing to say about each person, even if it was something as small as someone having nice hair or nice eyes. But the whole time she spoke, the expression on her face was a barely concealed scowl. By the time Kristen was ready to say something about F, the nurse quickly intervened and asked Kristen to say something about the person sitting next to F. At that moment, F, who is usually quiet and non-confrontational, lost it. She stood up so fast her chair fell back. F yelled at the nurse, "Why does Kristen get to go home?" Then she pointed at Kristen and shouted, "You tried to kill me, and you get to go home?" The nurse told F that she needed to calm down, and F replied, "Calm down? I tried to kill myself, and I'm stuck here for the next 3 months? This bitch tries to kill me, and she gets to go home to her family? What the fuck is wrong with this place?" F's favorite counselor, John, who was leading the group therapy that day, stood up from his chair and walked over to F. He said, "Can we talk outside for a minute?" F, who adored John, but felt like she got punched in the gut, snapped, "Why not? Not like I have a fucking choice." John asked F to sit at one of the tables, and he told her that he would be back in a moment. A couple of moments later, John came back holding a forbidden Coca-Cola can in his hand. While F drank her soda, John told F that in the past 2 days, they had been running tests on Kristen. He told F that Kristen had just been diagnosed as a paranoid schizophrenic. He explained that the voices that Kristen had been hearing in her head told her that F was possessed by a demon, and that the only way to save F's soul was to kill the body hosting the evil spirit. He said that he had talked to Kristen's parents about having the girl transferred to the top floor for a while, where she could be under close observation and received the treatment for her condition. Kristen's mother had said that solution was inconvenient. When John told Kristen's mom about the symptoms of paranoid schizophrenia and Kristen's likely prognosis, her mother simply called Kristen's condition an embarrassment and said her daughter's histrionics were not going to ruin her plans for her daughter. John told F that she could press charges against Kristen for attempted murder. This could land Kristen in a facility where she could get help. F almost agreed to that until John told her that the worst case scenario was that the judge did not believe in caring for the mentally ill and would simply send Kristen to juvenile hall, where he thought her condition might get worse. F said that she needed to think about what to do. John asked her if she wanted to be alone or if she wanted him to stay with her. She said she needed to be alone. As she sat at the table in the dining room, an older woman entered the room. She immediately checked her watch and snapped at her husband for already being behind schedule. Without being told, F knew that she was looking at Kristen's parents. Her mother walked around the dining room and huffed about how inconvenient this trip was, and as she walked past F, she scowled. Kristen's mom did not enter the common room. She simply stood at the door, snapped her fingers in her daughter's direction, and said, "Let's go." F watched as Kristen solemnly trailed behind her parents. Neither of Kristen's parents spoke to her. Her mother was a few feet in front of the group, grumbling about all the appointments they were already late for. Before Kristen exited the door, she glanced at F. She did not say anything. Her chin was tight as she fought back tears, but her eyes were soft and apologetic. F began to tear up, and she whispered, "I wish you the best," before Kristen disappeared behind the exit doors. F did not press charges. In fact, to this day, she hopes that Kristen got the help she needed and has achieved all of her goals. I'm lucky to call someone so thoughtful and kind my friend. Hey y'all, Killer Orange Cat here. First off, as always, thank you to everyone who has contributed to our GoFundMe. We have had several donors since our last video. I thank you all so much for your help. It has showed great kindness, and we appreciate it very much. Unfortunately, since my last video, Sir Pounce passed away. It was very upsetting, but we did recover. We have one kitten left, and he is eating a whole lot and doing better, so we hope he does reach adulthood. I delayed this video because of a movie I watched as a child called Saturday the 14th. It was a dumb movie, but as a kid I thought it was true that Saturday the 14th was worse than Friday the 13th, so I wanted to make that into the video. It really is an awful movie though, so I'm not telling anyone to watch it. If you like this video, please let me know by hitting the like button. If you're not already subscribed to Killer Orange Cat, feel free to hit the subscribe button and the bell below, but wait for the icon of Ichigo the cat that will appear at the end of this closing. Leave me a comment to let me know what you thought of the video, and please share it with someone you think might enjoy it. If you have a story you like narrated on Killer Orange Cat, please mail it to the address included in the description. But most importantly, and like always, make sure to check in your closet and check under your bed, because you never know where Killer Orange Cat might be hiding. Good night.
What is the scariest encounter with another human you have ever experienced? Have been home invaded 3 times, once by 2 guys who had a gun, a knife, and a bottle of petrol they splashed all over everyone, and the other 2 times by 4 dudes with knives. Got stabbed one of those times, only in the hand, but they were going for my face. Luckily, I was fast enough to catch it. Those experiences were pretty freaky and taught me a lot about how savage and animalistic people can be. I was investigating a fire for an insurance company in a fourplex in North STL. North STL is a bad area. It was clearly an arson. I had 5 separate, unconnected fires. I'd been there for a while, taking photos and doing my thing. I was drawing my diagram in the building when I hear two guys walking by the building on the other side of the wall. I'm straining to hear what they're saying since it could be pertinent to my investigation. The two guys get to the rear of the building where the fire department had ripped out the wall to be able to extinguish hot spots they'd found. I can clearly see them both standing there talking. They start to kick through the debris on the ground and one starts saying how some dumb woman had snitched on his buddy for setting this fire. He starts telling the other guy about how he's going to deal with her and pulls a god-darned pistol out of his waistband. At this point, I'm frozen in fear, about to crap my pants, hoping that they don't look 90 degrees and see me standing there like a jackass. So I crouch down as low I can without making noise and wait. They continue to talk about how it's bullcrap she told the cops on him and blah blah. Finally, a car drives by and I use the sound of it to get out of the house out the front door. Which unfortunately wasn't super quiet since most of the floor had collapsed and I was wearing fire boots. I get to my truck across the street. I'm sitting in the driver's seat trying to unclench my butthole when the guy with the gun walks around the side of the house to the front porch, sits down, and aims it at me. I turned the truck on and got the F out of there. I ended up going back about an hour later to see if they were gone because I had to finish my scene. Still top 5 scariest moment of my career so far. I was at a sleepover at my friend's place. We decided to sneak out and wander around aimlessly. We stopped at our school, which had a small patch of trees on the grounds where the older kids hung out during lunch. There was rumors of a great Playboy collection there, hence our visit. While there, my friend stepped off to the side to have a pee. A few seconds later he comes rushing back and says, "Run." I didn't know what his deal was, but as a kid in the forest with only the light of the moon, I figured asking questions was a secondary option to being left alone there. We ran until we couldn't run anymore. Finally, my friend explained that there was some weirdo looking at him go pee. He said that he believed the guy was jerking off. Being kids with a history of pranks, I thought he was effing with me. Then I looked back and saw the guy a long way back but moving in our direction. We kept running towards my friend's place and he kept following. When we got back we thought we lost him. We snuck back inside and turned off all of the lights in the basement. We laid there silently and terrified. About 10 minutes later we see something move by the window. We knew someone was out there. We stayed completely still and quiet. A minute later we hear a noise coming from a room in the basement. We both lost it and started yelling "Dad" for my friend's dad. He came running down the stairs and we were yelling "Someone's in that room." His dad flung open the door and the window was open and there were fresh marks on the wall from someone climbing in or out. For some reason he didn't call the police. He decided to stay downstairs with us for the night. I didn't really sleep and in the morning my friend's dad made me walk home with him. A few blocks away and there were a bunch of police. As we walked by, one of the cops stopped us and asked if we saw anything suspicious last night. We told him the story, which kicked off further questioning. It turns out that a kid went missing from his room right around the same time that we got chased home. They found the guy a few days later dead from suicide. They never found the boy he abducted. We had a lot of trouble with that. My friend's dad felt guilty for not calling the police. He became addicted to sleeping pills. My friend was traumatized with just how close he came to being grabbed in the forest. He turned to drugs really young and eventually killed himself. I went through therapy for a while and still have occasional night terrors from that night, even though it happened almost 30 years ago. Drunk driver tried to mow me down on my moped down a dead-end street. Luckily I managed to get my bike up the pavement and put a parked car between me and the drunk, so he couldn't get me. Pretty intense. I had someone try to run me down in broad daylight as I pushed my 3-month-old in a stroller. I got stuck on the curb and just picked up the whole stroller and ran. When my daughter was too small to go into the bathroom by herself, I would take her into the men's room with me. Once we were at a park and my daughter and I were standing in the restroom waiting for my son to finish up, and some random, normal-looking middle-aged guy came in to use the urinal. When he finished, he turned around with his penis still hanging out, took 2 steps towards my 3-year-old daughter and waved his penis in her face, then made a beeline for the door. It happened so quickly and was so unexpected that I was too stunned to react for a moment. Once I realized what had just happened, I ran out to find him, but he was gone. He must have raced straight into the woods to hide or something. At the time, I was furious that he got away, but in retrospect it was the best thing that could have happened. I was experiencing the sort of blind rage, where if I'd embraced it even a little, I'd have completely lost control, and I wanted to embrace that rage a lot. I shudder to think about what I might have done to that guy in front of my kids, and the likely legal consequences I could have faced. Me and my boyfriend came back at like 2 a.m. from a night out. We were both quite drunk and stumbled into the hallway to the elevator when we see drops of something on the floor. It definitely was blood. Fresh and wet. The elevator button and door were covered in bloody handprints as well. My boyfriend called the elevator, pushing me aside not knowing what would be in it. Luckily nothing except for a puddle of blood. The elevator came from the 5th floor. So we went investigating. The trail of blood ended at a door with huge hand smears of blood on the door. It took all our courage to ring, not the nicest place to live, robbery? But I am so glad we did. An elderly man opened the door. He looked like straight out of a horror movie. Covered in blood from head to toe. His gray sweater was red. His hair was wet. His shoes were filled with blood. We immediately sobered up. I called an ambulance which arrived in 2 minutes. My boyfriend went inside the flat helping the man sit down. There was so much blood I have never seen that in my life. We didn't know what happened to him until we met him yesterday properly for the first time. Recognized my boyfriend's glasses. He was drunk, wanted to ride his bike home, crashed somehow and got a huge cut on his head. He takes heart medicine which thins his blood, that's why he lost so much. If we wouldn't have rung the doorbell, he would have bled to death. He actually gifted us money and a super expensive bottle of champagne for something completely self-explanatory. I was up in my 3rd floor bedroom having just had a spliff chilling to music with my headphones on when I started to hear weird noises. Naturally I just thought it was because I was stoned, but it was weird enough for me to take my headphones off. I listened for a bit and coming from downstairs was a creepy voice I didn't recognize mixed in with John's, my housemate's, voice, but he sounded like he was in pain. I was like WTF, so I started walking slowly down my stairs and then looked into his room and saw John on his floor holding his eyes in pain with a big dude in a hoodie shouting at him and then grabbing things off the shelves. The next thing I knew, autopilot had kicked in and I ran towards the room and the hooded dude turned, ran out the door when I smashed into him, making us both go tumbling down the staircase, trying to exchange punches on the way down. We scuffled a bit in the hallway until he eventually ran out the door. It transpired that John, who at that time was on crutches, was hobbling home and went to open our front door, when the hooded dude came up behind him and pepper sprayed him in his face, blinding him. He then took him up to his bedroom to rob him and his stuff. Poor guy had to have iPads on for the next 2 days. Anyway, it was all pretty effed up, but John was okay in the end, and honestly I was so stoned it didn't really feel like it was happening at the time. Was like a bad trip. All moved out 2 weeks later. Was Brixton in London. Late 80s, was running errands in town with my mom and 2 sisters. Back then it wasn't uncommon to leave your kids in the car while you ran inside the store. We are sitting in the car waiting, and then I see an older guy walking towards our car. I just get a really bad feeling and start yelling at my sisters to lock the doors, while I lock the 2 on my side. He comes over and spends the next couple of minutes trying to open all the doors on the car while we are cowering in our seats. Eventually he gave up and left. We were all 8 and under in age at the time. I just knew that if he got in the car he would take one of us. This happened at our local grocery store 6-ish years ago. A mom left her 10-year-old daughter unattended in the car. It was hot out so the windows were down. A man noticed the kid and ran over to the car, yanking the girl by her hair and arms trying to pull her through the window. The girl started screaming, which caught the attention of another guy who came to her rescue and fought her attacker off. Police never found the creep or the truck he took off in. That little girl, had she not fought as hard as she did and without the help of guy number 2, would be dead or worse right now. No matter the year, the temperature, the location or type of store, never leave your kids unattended in the car. There's too many things that could go wrong. I'm sorry you and your siblings went through this op. My landlord's brother was high on angel dust and held me hostage for several hours. He was partially retarded, so I was able to drift his thoughts toward French toast and bong hits. I charmed my way out of getting raped and murdered. I will never forget his face in the bathroom mirror as he held my bleeding hands under the faucet water, while berating me, eye to eye, in the mirror. So scary. Back in the early 90s I worked as a night auditor for a small motel in Prospect Heights, Illinois. I was a young mother and worked nights while my husband worked days. Occasionally, my husband would stop by and check on me. It was a brutal schedule and I truly don't know how I made it on only a couple hours of sleep each day. But I digress. My job was to perform a daily audit on the rooms and money. Also, I would check people in and out of the hotel. The hours were midnight to 8 in the morning. One night I had finished my audit and was watching a scary movie on the little TV they had behind the front desk. It was winter and very cold. A man came up to the door and he was wearing a ski mask. For a second, I thought it was my husband, so I kind of smiled. He came up to the front desk and I asked if I could help him. He asked me why I had smiled at him. Well, I knew right then I was in trouble. He waved a big knife at me and told me to turn around. I felt the most fear then. I felt like I was going to die. He hopped over the front desk and cut one of the phone lines and took the money. I had my coat and purse back there and he took those as well. As he left he said, "I have your purse, I know where you live now." I stayed hunched in the corner behind the front desk as he left. Then I realized he had only cut the handset to one phone and the main line on another, so I took the handset from one phone and attached it to another where he had not cut the main line. I dialed 911 and got an operator on the line. Just as I was about to talk, the guy came back. Apparently, he had dropped his knife behind the desk. I saw it on the floor as he came around. I picked it up. In my mind I'm thinking, can I stab him? We stood there kind of facing each other. Me in my uniform and this big guy in a thick ski jacket. He demanded I give him the knife. I truly thought if I tried to stab him I would lose and he would kill me. I gave him the knife. He took the knife and hit me over the head with the handle of the knife a couple of times and then left. The police soon came and I recounted my story. As far as I know, he was never caught. The place I worked for let me have a day off, but when I needed more, I had head injuries, they fired me. It turns out, they had been robbed a few times before but had never put in security. I did take them to court for lost wages and I won. About a year later, maybe less, I saw on the news that a night auditor/clerk at the same hotel had been kidnapped from the motel, raped, stabbed and left for dead. They caught that guy and he is now in prison. I am literally shaking as I type this. It's been so long but I rarely talk about this or I just laugh it off like it was no big thing. Obviously it still affects me greatly. Scariest night of my life. The hotel, when I worked there, was an Econo Lodge but they apparently changed the name soon after I left, to Forest Lodge. So when the story about the kidnapped clerk came on the news, I didn't immediately realize it was the same motel. Until they showed a photo of the motel. Then I knew and it scared the crap out of me. My father. He was a piece of crap sperm donor and the time he was barely in my life he messed me up. I remember my mother telling me to run when he came home angry or drunk, to lock my bedroom door and turn on the TV. I could hear him screaming, breaking things, beating up my mother, banging on my door, trying to bust in. Police coming, my mother crying, him being back that same night or next morning and hit repeat. Sometimes she couldn't do anything and I would be involved, and he would use me as a punching bag and I would be thrown around like a rag doll. He would rip my mother's clothes off and force himself on her in front of me. He would always be let go because he had friends that were police officers. One night I woke up and heard my mother crying and went to our front door that lead to the apartment stairs and opened the door to look down. I remember I said something but don't know what and saw my mother bleeding and her shirt ripped off. He came up the stairs and I looked up and remember him punching me hard, not sure if he punched more than once but remember my head hitting the coffee table and nothing else. I don't remember what happened days after or anything but remember the judge giving my father weekend custody of me and me crying whenever I was forced to be with him. He would act like a different person in public and sometimes at home and out of nowhere he would be someone else. He eventually stopped picking me up and never saw me again. I was around 5, but he left his mark. I remember him shooting up with me in the car, drinking and driving with me, touching me and other kids, him pulling out a gun or knife at people, and so on. He was a very scary person to be around and left destruction to anyone of the female gender he stayed close to. Was trying to take my girlfriend to the hospital since we thought she had appendicitis or something. It's like 12:30 a.m. on a Sunday in Fayetteville, NC, which if you don't know, is an absolute crap hole. We get 2 streets away from where we were living when we come across this street racing type car, neon lights on the rims and stuff, pulled out halfway into the road. I stop and wait a while for it to move and it doesn't. So I pull around it and keep going. The car accelerates and cuts me off around the bend. It slows down and won't let me past. A second car pulls up on the right, a third car pulls up on the left. At this point we're boxed in. A young black guy wearing a white tank top and khaki shorts gets out of the car holding a pistol. Someone else in the car hands him a blue bandana, then he starts walking towards us. At this point I'm starting to realize that this is too many people for a robbery and there was a reason for him being handed the bandana and it's probably a gang initiation. So I throw the car in reverse and bump a fourth car I hadn't been looking at because I was looking at the guy with the effing gun. I throw it forward and go to squeeze past the car on the left and the front car when the guy started shooting. He fired 3 shots, that thankfully didn't hit either of us. It's important to mention that at this point we're on sort of a back road a bit away from a 4-way intersection with a stoplight. Across the street there's a shopping center with a 24-hour grocery store across the street. I speed through the red light with the intention of going to the store and asking for help. Before I can make it across, we get T-boned on the passenger side by a completely unrelated vehicle that was going 55 miles per hour. Car span out, ended up on the side of the road and was totaled. The guys in the cars effed off once other people were involved. I ended up getting a traumatic brain injury and whiplash from the car accident and was paranoid as hell for a very long time afterwards. Girlfriend ended up mostly okay, some bruised ribs and whiplash as well. Watching TV when I'm suddenly face to face with a SWAT dude pointing a pistol at my face. Anonymous call/wrong address that nearly got me shot. Shake my head. This was before swatting was a thing, by the way.